Welcome to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. This podcast is all about conversations about healing and rising from the ashes of your grief and trauma. In this podcast, we will be deconstructing and highlighting the different aspects of grief and loss. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Zampatella. Hi, you are with Phoenix Rising with Dr. Christina Zampatella. I am here today with Dr. Rebecca Morse, who is going to be talking to us about why not the 5 stages of grief. And we're going to cover things like, well, what are the 5 stages of grief? Why not the 5 stages of grief any longer? And lots of other things that are related to our misconception of what the grieving process actually looks like and how it's different than what we're being told. So definitely a lot more covered than that, but I want to give Dr. Morse the opportunity to introduce herself and tell us who you are.
Thank you so much. So as she said, my name is Rebecca Morse, but I'm also a developmental and behavioral psychologist and a thanatologist. And so I specialize in the study and research of death, dying, loss, mourning, and bereavement. And part of what I get to do, besides fun things like teaching statistics, is teaching courses in thanatology. In fact, another thing that I get to do that I really appreciate this opportunity is to try to educate the public about death and grief and loss. And so that's part of what I do in both my professional world, but also my fun professional world, and being a part of the Dr. World Productions platform and getting the word out about what's important about grief and loss.
And what is your kind of like educational background?
So I actually started off in music and dance.
I did not know that.
Fun fact.
Yes, fun fact.
Music and dance, and I took an elective in psychology and thought, oh, this is cool. This is really cool. Maybe music therapy is in my future. And so I was a double major in music and psych. And I took an elective in thanatology at Hood College, taught by Doctors Terry Martin and Dana Cable.
Oh, you're kidding. Okay.
And so they were my mentors, and I realized, oh, this is it. Because I was already interested in working with children that had unusual development due to a developmental disability or a disease like cancer or HIV. And I was actually at the National Institutes of Health, and I worked with children within those different domains. But I realized that there was a lot of non-death loss that those families were experiencing. And I found that getting an education in grief actually allowed me to be better at what I was doing. Now, I'm not a clinician, putting that out there. I'm a researcher and I'm an educator.
And quite an educator will teach at least a good 6 courses at any given period of time, and is my my own hero. So I'm really thankful that you're here. So let's start with this. What is 5 stages of grief that began in 1969? And I know a lot of the background, but I want to hear it from you. What are the 5 stages of grief, and then why not?
Okay, so I love this question. This is one of my favorite things with my students, because usually when they sign up to take any class on death and dying, the only thing anyone's ever heard of are the 5 stages. And so just unpacking that a little bit. So first of all, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was the first one who really put that out there, she was studying dying, not grieving.
That's right.
And it was through interviews. She was talking to people and she was trying to capture their experience. So it was almost phenomenological, trying to capture what was going on. And unfortunately, what happens often in psychology is, and I know you know this, but for those who aren't aware, we like our theories. Our theories are a way to frame and to structure our understanding of what we're experiencing, of making sense of that human lived experience. And I'm a developmental psychologist, so this totally maps into what I enjoy. we like capturing how the human being develops, how we grow, how we change over time. And stage theories are something that a lot of developmental psychologists like because it makes sense of what we go through. Because think about how you grow up, right? You go through a stage of being an infant, of being a toddler, of being in school, being a teenager, the quarter life crisis for anyone out there in that mid-20 range. So we like stages. So when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross put this theory out there, and she was descriptively trying to capture what was going on, she was suggesting that there is this denial initially, that you're sort of recoiling. It's a defense mechanism. Freud referred to defense mechanisms like denial as being primitive. Primitive doesn't mean that they're basic or that they're simple or lesser than. What he meant by primitive is that they're not trained, right? Anyone who's babysat a 2-year-old, you catch a 2-year-old with their hand in the cookie jar, and we all do the dumb thing of, are you stealing a cookie? Well, duh, you're stealing a cookie, right? They've got their hand in the cookie jar. And you say, what are you doing? Are you stealing a cookie? What do they say?
Nope.
Nope. They weren't taught to lie.
Yeah.
It's primitive. It's an instinctive response in the face of something threatening, which is that grown-up who's angry because you weren't supposed to be stealing a cookie.
Right.
We do the same thing when we get bad news around death. It's an instinctive response. And so that's what Kubler-Ross was talking about. And when that doesn't seem to work, Kubler-Ross was saying that then you get mad. You get mad at the doctors. You get mad at the world around you. I took care of myself. I work out 3 times a week. What do you mean I have cancer? My kid is 3. What did they do to deserve cancer? And then she talked about how there's this bargaining, right? That you're going to try to talk to God, talk to a higher power, talk to the doctors, try and wiggle your way out of it.
Right.
You're rationalizing it. And then from that, she talked about how you have this depression, and it's this despair that you can't change it. And from there, then she said there was this acceptance. Now, acceptance doesn't mean you're okay with it. Doesn't mean you're happy about it. It means you're at peace with the inevitability of it. So again, it sounds great, right?
I think it sounds great because there's so, and some people will say it sounds very linear.
It is.
And,
it is.
And it is very linear. And I remember in 1976, apparently she came out and said, it's not supposed to be this linear, but it had already taken hold because we didn't really have a theory that really, made a whole lot of sense. And it just, I don't know, it's like we were right. We didn't even have a journal for death, loss, and grief until 1970, and we've been dying like a super long time. Like, are you kidding me? That's how much denial, our own denial as a culture we've been in, right? Just researching the topics of it. But it was never intended to be applied to a person who is bereft.
Yep.
And so she even said it's not supposed to be this linear, excuse me, but it had already taken hold. And it just seems so simple. And, I never thought of the overlay between the developmental concept of denial in the face of some kind of adversity, or we're in trouble or anxiety or what it is. And then also seeing that in this parallel process of grief. And so it looks and feels so similar. It must be it. That I never thought of it in that way. That's really interesting.
And so I think one of the things that, and you're right, because people will put those middle stages back and forth. A couple of other theorists have recently tried to augment that stage theory. And so you have David Kessler, who added on at the end, pulling from, I believe, work from others like Niemeyer and Burke and others, who talked about meaning reconstruction and meaning making.
Right.
So what comes next? What comes after this sort of post-traumatic growth?
Right.
And so Kessler added this additional piece onto,
Recently.
And that's
very
recently.
Yeah.
And there are others who have interjected a stage between that initial denial And then that next phase of anger,
Mm-hmm.
of anxiety and panic.
And why there? Like, what? It just, because it just looks familiar. And what about for people who don't see all of these,
well, exactly,
in their experience?
And I think that's one of the problems as a developmentalist. And I'll be perfectly honest, sometimes I'll even say some of the stages backwards because they're discontinuous.
They are discontinuous and they overlap.
They do. And again, that is when we try to map it onto human development as opposed to a human experience. Developmental theories tend to either be continuous or discontinuous.
What do you mean by that?
So a continuous developmental theory is the idea that we are slowly evolving over time. We're developing skill sets, we're hitting milestones, but that there's this gradual progression. Whereas a lot of the early developmentalists were discontinuous. So Piaget, Erikson, the idea that you had to fully master a milestone or a developmental threshold before you could go to the next. And that's the biggest problem we have with stage theory when it comes to grief. Because it assumes that you're done with one before you progress to the next,
Right.
And that it has to be done in a certain order.
And if it's not done in a certain order, then you must be grieving wrong.
Exactly.
Or if you're not experiencing that.
And that is the exact problem, is it went from being descriptive to prescriptive.
Ooh, say that one more time.
We went from being descriptive to prescriptive.
That's amazing. That is, again, another way I've never thought. I've had a client, I remember one time when I was out in California, I had a client who came in grief-related, and she was like, oh, I just left my other therapist. And I'm like, oh boy, because sometimes it's for other reasons, right? And I was like, why? And she goes, well, because I'm not angry. And I really am not experiencing anger about it. And she's telling me I'm grieving wrong. And I'm like, have a seat. Let's talk. Because you're right. You do not have to be angry. And that's your prescription. I love the way you said that, because even mental health professionals who are not trained are prescribing, because we're not, again, there's not an assumption that we should be trained in how to understand grief from a more phase, like softer perspective, where these phases can overlap one another, and that's okay. And you can feel like you're regressing, but you're not really regressing. Mm-hmm. You're examining, you're exploring, but you can't fully regress because you've already continued to move forward. Yeah. And in that way, there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm hearing you say, when we do this in a non-continuous process, like we see in the stage theory, it creates a lot of problems and misconceptions, not only for the client or for ourselves as, our own selves, but for other people who are supposed to be helping individuals who are grieving.
Well, one of the things that I think is particularly insidious about it is it's not even the external world and what people are telling us we need to do. We internalize those messages, just like we internalize body image, right? Media messages for that. But we internalize messages through songs, movies, books of, oh, this is what it looks like.
This is what the newspaper says.
Yeah.
This is what this movie
exactly
says grief looks like.
And so the problem with that then is you think, especially if you are the griever, you're not the dying person, but you're the grieving person, and you're like, I failed at protecting my loved one, and now I'm even failing at grief. And this idea that if you don't do it correctly, that somehow you're dishonoring that relationship and the memory of that loved one.
And then what's wrong with me if I'm not doing it right?
Mm-hmm.
What's going to hit me? There was already perhaps a lot of unknowns and knowns, and what did I miss? What did I not miss? And when we presented together on prolonged grief disorder in family caregivers, we really saw the amount of risk factors associated with people who are caring for other people that might lend itself into very, very stuck grief.
Absolutely.
And, some of those are really just not really understanding their own process of what is like following their intuition in their grieving process.
Well, and this really maps onto, so I work at the Institutes for Psychological Sciences, which is part of Divine Mercy University.
Okay.
And we actually have it's a Catholic school. We have a Catholic Christian meta model of the human person.
Okay.
And it's a broad theory. It's not, oh, you have to be, Christian for this to work. That's not how it works.
Okay.
But one of the things that it talks about is this idea of flourishing and languishing. And languishing is really another word for being stuck.
Okay.
You're not having that personal growth. This is a holistic model and approach.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the pieces of that, one of the premises within that model is the idea of vocation. And when we are in a relationship with someone, often there's a vocational calling, whether it's to be a mother, a spouse, a good
like
friend.
a job.
A dutiful daughter. Absolutely.
Okay.
A job counts as well.
Okay. Okay.
So if we're talking about job loss,
Right.
right? That's a whole vocation.
Yeah, that's
a whole other topic.
Right.
But one of the things that can be problematic with the stage theory, pulling it back around, is that if someone is stuck, if they're languishing, one of the things that we can do to help that person to start to flourish is actually looking at what are the vocational needs that that person has. Are they finding ways to flourish and to fulfill them? Because we tend to glom onto theories, to self-help books, to it's okay, you're not okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, yes, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to not always be happy. But just saying, oh, it's okay to be miserable, that path can lead to more languishing.
Well, and indefinitely,
Yeah.
right? Is it really okay to be, is it okay to not be okay for the rest of your life? How are you defining okay? Like, it's okay that you're stuck for the rest of your life? Or does that mean it's okay that you're going to have grief around this the rest of your life? Of course it's okay. You're going to carry your grief, right?
Always.
But how does that look, and how intrusive is your grief? Is it keeping you from being able to engage in your future plans? Is it keeping you from being able to develop new relationships? That's not okay.
Exactly.
No, not in 3 weeks, but with people that I've worked 10 years down the road, it's not okay that that person is not okay.
Well, and that brings me to one of my biggest issues with stage theory.
Okay.
Time.
Oh, yeah. Say more.
Marissa Tomei had the most amazing line in It Had to Be You. Time wounds, all heals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea that just because time goes on doesn't mean it magically gets better.
No.
It doesn't just decay and flitter away.
Right.
And stage theory assumes, because it's this progressive component, people tend to arbitrarily fit a timestamp, an expiration date.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you were angry for 6 weeks. Why aren't you now in, this depression or bargaining or whatever,
right.
Stage you should be in? It puts an artificial time limit on grief. Grief doesn't end in a year. In fact, one of the things that I think is particularly telling, Amy Chow, who's a phenomenal researcher in Hong Kong, she did a study looking at people's grief at the 1-year anniversary. And one of the things she found was that the 1-year mark was actually a little anticlimactic because people got through it.
Yeah.
It was the time right before.
Right.
It's that leading up because you're anticipating it being worse than it is.
Right.
So think about when you're taking your kid to the, pediatrician to get a shot. If you lie to them until it doesn't hurt, well, then they're going to hate your guts, right? And then the next time it's going to be even worse. They're anticipating how bad it'll be. What happens if you tell them, yeah, it hurts, but you'll get through it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm a brave, I'm a big kid. So we create this idea in our head of what that 1-year mark is going to be like. And so before it's that kid who's had a shot before and they know it hurts and they want to avoid it at all costs. But there's also the other side of the 1-year mark. Wait, I got through it. It wasn't awful. did I not love that person enough?
Right. Then there's some guilt that might pop in.
There can be a lot of
Yeah.
guilt and socially a lot of judgment.
Yeah.
There's this idea. So the first year is hard. You've got all your first birthday, your first anniversary, your first Valentine's Day, your first St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
Right? You name it, it's a first.
Right.
But a lot of times that first year, you're still in survival mode. You're just getting through.
That second year can be harder than the first year.
It can be harder.
Yeah.
And sometimes the third year can be harder. But because we put so much emphasis on all the firsts, that by the time you get to that later time point when people are really starting to process that grief, everyone else has moved on. They've moved on with their lives.
And you have not been able to really move forward in the way that you would want to.
Absolutely.
Can I pivot with you for a moment?
Of course.
What might be good about the stage model?
I think what is helpful about the stage model is that it gives us a coin of communication. It gives us a language. It gives us a term to put on what we're feeling. And I think that's what was done very well. I am blanking on the name of the person who elaborated on Kubler-Ross's stages, and they sort of doubled them up. So instead of just being depression, it might be depression and despair. Instead of just anger, it's anger and frustration. And there's a beauty to that, because what it's doing is labeling those emotions when you don't know what you're feeling. And a lot of times you have so much physiological arousal during grief, you don't even know what emotion you're feeling.
Yeah, if you're not in tune with what part of your body, how it feels, how you're connected to it, and what that might be reflecting, if you haven't had the opportunity to really kind of engage with that developmental awareness, because there is a developmental process with that. You don't have that feedback. It's there, but you're not connected with the feedback of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of brilliance in it, and it's very face valid.
Yes.
And because
it just makes sense, right? Those are all familiar feelings.
Yeah, they're familiar feelings. And again, it's descriptive, so people can look at people around them and their own experiences and say, oh yeah, that fit. Well, first of all, the plural of an anecdote, meaning your personal story, is not anecdata, right? So just because it fits your experience and a handful of people you know, doesn't mean it's a law or a truth.
Right. And I think, and tell me what you think about this, because this is just in my own research, my own experience or whatever. I don't think the stage model is particularly culturally sensitive.
Absolutely, because you have different cultures endorse or encourage some types of emotional expression and not others.
Right.
And so if you have a culture where it is not appropriate and it's not considered healthy within that cultural context to experience or express that emotion, that's not going to be your lived experience. And that's why I said it's not a truth or a law.
Right.
It's a series of anecdotes.
Right. And I think it's very, it misses the very individualized nature of grief. That's what I'm hearing. So there's this word, it's idiosyncratic. It's not idiosyncratic, meaning it's not an individualized, it doesn't leave space for that. And we have other theories that aren't as popular, aren't as out there, which is hopefully things like this podcast will bring that to light. And, that's unfortunately above and beyond the context of our talk today. And if I could, I'll bring you back for that one. But there's, phase theories and task theories and attachment theories and meaning making and all these other things that aren't being put out there for other people to say, oh, wait, that feels more in the context of my, I love when you say this, lived experience. This feels different to me. And oh my God, there are people out there that recognize this, and not only people, but researchers, people who are in this field and experts in this field who are able to say, we see you and we see that doesn't work. Now there are overlaps, because being shocked that somebody has died, even if you knew that they were going to pass, that often is a very similar experience. And if you look at the different orientations, you can see versions of that.
Yeah.
But they'll say this might not be culturally appropriate, like continued bonds. That's not culturally appropriate in some cases, right?
Whereas other cultures, it's very much an active part of their existence.
Absolutely. Here, you've got a table setting. So I know I'm getting off. I'm going the
I will say that
here.
There are a lot of different theories and models. And I think it's really important for all of us to remind ourselves that a theory or model is just that. It's a framework to try and deconstruct so that we can understand, we can describe. And the other piece of that is we want to be able to predict and control. But that's getting into the scientific realm. I'll shelve my nerdness for a moment.
I love the nerdness. You're allowed to bring the nerdness in.
But I will say that I love William Worden has a task-based approach.
Yes.
And I like that because it's more behaviorally grounded. I think it's a little bit more universal. Not saying it's perfectly universal, but I think it's a little bit more universal because it talks about what you're processing. So it's not labeling your experience. It's trying to describe how to healthily process.
So it's very active, though,
It's very
which might
active.
be pretty westernized. But I hear what you're saying. And yeah, it talks about, hey, guess what? This is the lived experience. And behaviorally what you can do and what you're experiencing.
And it can be retooled to be less active.
I like that. Yeah.
And I think that's one of its sort of user-friendly components.
Agreed.
In terms of the dying person, Charles Core has an amazing approach. He also, for anyone that's interested, has done some phenomenal writings and some interviews on Kubler-Ross and stage theory. So there's some amazing material on that as well. But one of my favorites is Strebe and Shute. And they talk about how we vacillate between being loss-oriented and restoration-oriented. And one of the things that I really like about theirs is that they capture the idea that early on in the loss, we tend to spend more time focused on what we lost. And the further we get through that processing of grief, I don't want to say time, but through the processing, we start to spend more time in a restoration orientation.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up because we talked about it in another podcast, but in a different context. And I think that's the strength of that model of coping, really, is that oscillation and realizing that can be an intervention, that can be a explanation, that can be a validation. I mean, it's based on. I mean, they're huge into the research, like they are, and they have a lot to say about lots of other types of theories out there. But I think you nailed it there. That really allows for that individualized nature of learning how to process and cope and function when you have a loss. So I'm glad you're bringing it up again.
Well, and I think it also helps, it maps onto, so humans, we love using analogies and metaphors and comparisons. And a lot of times we talk about grief as waves of grief. And that's because often when we have an emotional trigger, then we have a physiological arousal. We cognitively become aware of that physiological arousal. Then we label what we believe that experience or sensation is. And when we're hit with grief, in the beginning, and I think this is why the waves analogy is just so meaningful for people, you feel like someone who doesn't know how to swim, and you get tumbled, and you don't know how to get up. And sometimes you can see the wave coming, and you don't know how to get out of its way. Grief processing is much like learning to swim. As those waves hit and you get more experience, you learn how to navigate it. Sometimes, for those who have gone swimming, you know that means that you have to swim a little bit further out and get past it. Sometimes you know it's going to hit and you don't have time to do anything, so what do? You take a deep breath and you dive under that wave.
Or you hit a riptide.
And
it just yanks you over and you, oh, this is a riptide. I'm not saying, oh, this is great, I'm going all the way out here. But it's enough to be able to say, there are so many things that could be happening in this process, and I may or may not be prepared for that. And I think
Exactly.
that the may or may not be prepared reminds me of how that 5-stage model, soon to be 6 or 6-stage model, still doesn't quite capture that. I mean, if you're thinking that part of I don't know what to expect, the shock of that, and that happens throughout the course of your grieving process, how is that the first stage? And does it stop? Now they're starting to talk about how they overlap, but there's still an intrinsic kind of understanding that there are stages that you were going to go through, and just does not seem to really resonate with what we're hearing when we're really working with somebody.
Well, and I think one of the things that is helpful about something like stage theory, or it's okay, you're not okay, is that it's an attempt to normalize something that feels not normal. When you're in the midst of it, you feel different.
So the
because
structure
you
of
are
it.
different. Absolutely. Okay. It's a validation. And I think to the extent that it validates your experience, it can be helpful up until the point where it's validating something that's actually maladaptive or unhealthy for you.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm a person who's bereft, and 60% of our culture is bereft at any given period in time, and maybe a bit more right now because of COVID, right? What am I going to do with this information that I'm hearing right now? Like, what do you mean? There's not 5 stages? Like, now what?
All right, well, this is really tongue-in-cheek, but if you're experiencing grief and your normal coping mechanisms of talking to your social network, reaching out to friends, family, if you belong to any sort of group of people where there's support, whether it's religion, spirituality, a book club, if those mechanisms aren't helping you, then looking for a professional who can help you. I'm sorry, if I see on their website that they talk about the 5 stages,
yeah,
don't go there, please. Because
this coming from the former president of the Association for Deaf Education and Counseling, who has just nailed exactly, because a lot of therapists will say, I specialize in grief. Just because you saw a ton of people grieving, which, by the way, is every single person who walks into your office, just because you're saying it doesn't mean you specialize in it. Yeah. It really is a specialization, just like an eating disorder. Now, look, can I learn how to facilitate and companion you through grief without having to be a grief specialist? Absolutely. Yep. People are doing that all, but be educated about the fact it doesn't have to look like this.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's my point. If you've got a good clinician, they've got skills.
Absolutely.
And they can apply those skills in a myriad of ways.
Right.
However, if they're claiming their specialization is grief and they're talking about something that's very limited, if they're glommed on to a very sort of prescriptive approach to your grief process, that's kind of like if you're a cat lover and you're looking for someone to date and somebody's profile says that they don't like cats, what do? Swipe whichever way it is you're supposed to use. I don't use those apps, but swipe the wrong way.
Right, swipe the wrong way.
So if you're looking for someone, something that the information from a conversation like this, it can inform you so that you are an informed consumer.
Right.
And unfortunately, when it comes to clinical care, therapeutic help, it's not like reading a nutrition label. How many grams of sodium and sugar are in it? So you have to do a little bit of homework. And that's hard because if you're broken, if you're hurting, if you're grieving, the last thing you have is the energy to advocate for yourself. And this is where maybe you call a friend and say, I need help researching and finding someone good.
Right. Right.
And so for them to help you could be something very useful. Even if they can't directly help you heal, your friends can still help you get to the healing you need.
Sure. And if your friends aren't helping because of some of the things that they're saying, and you and I are going to touch on disenfranchised grief here shortly in another episode, but if they're not helping, even though they're trying to help, being able to say, that's not helpful. I appreciate what you're doing because I know you're trying to help me feel better. This is more helpful to me. Please do this. And learning how to do that. Even if you're just hearing it right now for the first time, you've been doing that. You've got people who are saying to you, hey, there's no right, wrong way of going about doing this. Just making sure you're surrounding yourself with people that understand how to give you the permission to grieve the way you need to grieve and to be able to explore your grief the way that you need to, which may or may not be talking about it. Mm-hmm. But whichever way, your grieving process is to be able to, I think I'm hearing you say, is really make sure that the people who are around you are giving you that space in order to heal and the support you need to heal and validation you need to heal.
Absolutely.
And to not go through the prescription to challenge that. If it doesn't feel right, then you're right. It's not right for you.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you talking about this. God, that all just made so much sense. And that it's a really important topic for people to hear. Really important. So if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, I won't give them your personal phone number, but what might they be able to do to get a hold of you?
Well, nowadays we have the magic of Google.
Oh, Google. Dr. Google.
Yes,
Okay.
and the interwebs.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to. IT joke. But I'm at the Institute for Psychological Sciences, so I'm easy to find online. I also adjunct and teach specialty courses in thanatology at a couple of other universities. So
they can track you down.
For better or worse.
Yeah, for better or for worse. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
Great.
for this opportunity and for helping spread the word.
Sure, absolutely. All right, guys. Have a good one. Bye. Thank you for listening to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it, subscribe, and leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. We want to be a resource for anyone who's experiencing loss, and this is a simple way you can help us spread the word. Check out our show description. There you'll find a link to connect with me on social media, as well as helpful articles and resources.